Hi, welcome back to Journals from the Edge, and today is Mother's Day. I am not with my daughter in Charlotte. I am actually in the St. James. It's a gated community between Southport and Oak Island, North Carolina, and I'm here with little Bentley today. It's raining. It's just been a rainy couple of days here and should rain a couple more, which are my favorite days in the world because I have no idea. I just feel like when it rains, you don't have to be anywhere or do anything. You can just stay here, read and write and just be. And that's why I love rainy days. It allows me to just be in the moment and just think and write and read and do all the things that I love to do. So I wanted to read you something I wrote, and I will have to read it. I wrote it in honor of Matthew. I know Megan's been celebrated today for being a mother. Matthew never had a chance to have children. He did die at the age of 24. So this is something I wrote one day, and I just wanted to share it. And I thought Mother's Day, it means a lot to me, so I thought I'd read it to you. This is called Echoes of a Life, and it's dedicated to my son Matthew. I remember bits and pieces of the start of the worst day of my life, the day that changed everything in ways I still can't fully grasp. I remember sitting at a friend's house, eating dinner, as my phone kept ringing relentlessly. When I finally answered, all I could hear was my daughter screaming, frantic and hysterical. "Where are you? Where?" She was saying something about my son, something terrible to happen, and why wasn't I there? She was cursing. She was just, "Come down, come now." Her words were a blur. She just didn't make any sense. And I never heard her like that before. Her voice was a raw, endless wail. And eventually I gathered the meaning hidden in her shattered words. I needed to get there now. My landlord, seeing the panic in my eyes, helped me figure out how to drive to the trauma center in South Carolina. As I set off alone, every turn felt like a weight pressing down on me. The fear of what I might find, the terror of facing something I couldn't bear gripped me. I was lost in both the unfamiliar roads and the dread that had overtaken my heart. I eventually found the trauma center, but once inside, I became disoriented, lost in a maze of cold, sterile hallways. It was a kind police officer who finally spotted me wandering and led me to where I needed to go. Outside my son's room, I saw sorrowful faces, long faces, their silence conveying deep grief. Then I walked into his room and froze, overwhelmed by the sight before me. My first thought was to run, to flee from this surreal nightmare. I stood there staring at my son lying on the hospital bed, machines beeping and whirring, forcing breath into his still body. I was speechless, unable to move, unable to process the devastating reality in front of me. This cannot be true. This cannot be my child. This cannot happen to us, to our family, not again, not now, not so soon. I had just buried my mother a few weeks before. For the past 3 years prior to her death, she had suffered from Alzheimer's and dementia, and they slowly took her away from us, piece by piece. I devoted every ounce of myself to ensuring that her final days were lived with grace and dignity, doing everything in my power to honor the woman she was. At the same time, I had uprooted my entire life, leaving behind 17 years of my home, a life that I had in Charlotte, to move to a town where I knew only a handful of people. I just settled into a new home, a fresh start, a fresh chapter. My son had planned to join me there, ready to begin a new journey on his own after the Army, but life had other plans. I remember the long hours I spent lying beside him in his bed, clutching his broken arm, watching as people came into the room to say their final goodbyes. I remember the warmth of his hand, the rhythmic sound of the machine breathing for him, each mechanical breath filling the room with both hope and heartbreak. I watched the rise and fall of his chest, the artificial rhythm keeping time with his silent heart. He looked so peaceful with only a cut above his eye. He looked just like he had on those countless nights when I would quietly sneak into his room to watch him sleep. But this time, I knew he wasn't going to wake up. These were the last moments I would ever have to see him like this, to sit by his side while he rested, while he was warm. Even in the depths of my grief, I felt a strange gratitude for these final days, for the chance to hold him, to be with him as we waited for his life to give new hope to those awaiting his organs. I remember driving home after they wheeled him away for surgery. My phone rang and I answered it. A young woman on the line asked why I hadn't shown up for my dinner reservation that evening. Calmly, almost detached, I told her that my son had just been killed. The words felt foreign and jagged, slicing through the air as I said them aloud for the first time. There was a pause on the other end, then a quick, "I'm so sorry," before she hung up. I pulled into a gas station and finally let the dam break. The tears I had held back in front of my daughter came pouring out. I sobbed, deep, guttural cries, unrestrained, that seemed to tear through my very soul. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, drowning in the weight of my grief. At some point, a man tapped on my car window and asked if I was okay. "No," I said, "I'm not okay. I will never be okay again." When I finally made it home, I faced the impossible task of preparing for the long trip to the city where his funeral would be held. The idea of packing, making hotel reservations, even imagining the days ahead was overwhelming. My mind felt like it had short-circuited, spinning in endless chaotic loops. The carousel of thoughts made me dizzy. I couldn't focus on anything except the crushing reality of saying goodbye to my child yet again. I arrived in town before my son's body did. Most of the arrangements had already been made by my daughter and her father, so all I had to do was wait. When the moment came, I walked into the room where a solitary casket stood. My heart raced as I approached, already knowing what awaited me, yet still unprepared for the crushing reality of it. There he was, dressed in his army uniform, looking so handsome and perfect in a way that only he could. But the light, the vibrant energy that defined him was gone. What lay before me was only a shell, a reminder of the young man he had been. I told myself he was already somewhere else, beginning a new journey in another realm. Yet I couldn't stop myself from reaching out. I placed my hand over his, hoping for some trace of him, some fleeting connection, even though I knew this truly wasn't him anymore. The next day was his viewing. I couldn't bear to leave his side. I know I should have been in the receiving line, and I stood there for a few minutes, but I couldn't do it. I went and stood by his casket. Hour after hour, I stood there, unable to leave his side. I just couldn't look away from the face I knew so intimately. I drank in every detail of his features, committing them to memory as if my soul were etching them onto its very fabric. I saw not just the young man before me, but every version of him I had known. The baby I cradled, the boy I nurtured, the teenager who challenged and inspired me, and the soldier who made me so proud. Memories flooded my mind, vivid and bittersweet, like scenes from an old movie reel. I stayed there, holding on to every moment, every chapter of his life, until they came to take him away from me again. When they closed the casket lid, my heart shattered all over. I knew it was the last time I would ever see his face, the last time I could physically be near him in this lifetime. And as I watched him load his coffin into the hearse, a devastating finality washed over me. This was the last time I would share space with my son here on earth. My boy, my baby, was gone. The funeral was held at the graveside, and walking from the car to the grave felt utterly surreal. My legs felt like lead, unwilling to carry me toward that dreaded tent, the kind that belongs to farewells and graveyards, the kind that marks yet another life lost, the kind that you can see from the road that tells other people, yes, someone has died today. Somehow I managed to take a seat at the front, directly before him. I sat stoic, unyielding, gripping the hand of the person beside me with a desperate ferocity, as though their touch might anchor me to the earth. The words spoken about my son barely registered. Instead, my focus shifted to the faces around me, a mosaic of people who had been part of his life and ours. Some I knew intimately, others only in passing, but all of them had gathered to say their final goodbyes to my baby. He had lived such a big life, touching hearts across the world, and seeing everyone gathered from all over the world, united by their love for him, brought a strange, bittersweet comfort. It was a reminder of how deeply he was loved and how much he mattered. A folded flag was presented to me in recognition of his honorable service to his country. The weight of it in my hands felt impossibly heavy, a tangible symbol of the sacrifices he made while in service. When the gun salute rang out, I flinched, startled by the sharp cracks that pierced the air. Others, including the military personality, jumped at the sound too. For a brief, unexpected moment, laughter rippled through the crowd. It was small, but unmistakable, and it felt like Matthew's doing. He had always loved a good laugh, even in the most serious of circumstances. When it was over, I rose because it seemed like I should, because everybody else got up. But the crowd, as it began to disperse, I found myself rooted in place, unable to leave him again. My heart rebelled against the thought of walking away from my son, knowing this was the final goodbye. Leaving him at the hospital was hard. Leaving him in the funeral home was hard. But leaving him in the graveyard was extraordinarily hard. I was one of the final people to leave the site. With my hand on the casket, I stood alone, the truth settling like a heavy stone. He was returning to the earth, and I couldn't follow. The one and only time I couldn't be with my child, couldn't see what he was doing, know where he was, or go visit him. This was his journey, not mine. He had finished his time in this life, his path here complete, and had moved on to a place beyond my reach. I returned home to the beach, to an empty house, one my son would never get to see. The silence was deafening and the pain unbearable. I was sick, physically, emotionally, mentally, every way possible. Pacing the floors, waiting, but for what? For someone to call and tell me it'd been a mistake, a nightmare I could wake up from? I longed for a voice on the other end of the line to say my son was coming home, that I'd be able to hug him again, but no such call ever came. I was left alone to deal and wrestle with the demons of grief, shadows that threatened to consume me. A few people who saw the depth of my pain took me to the hospital, where I was diagnosed with extreme grief. I sought the help of a grief counselor who offered solace, some small attempt to explain why my son had to die. But there are no real answers. There never are. No one knows why these things truly happen, why some lives are cut short in the middle of them while other people live to be very old age. I knew I had to find a way to keep waking up each morning to survive for my daughter and grandchildren. I had to dig deep within myself to unearth the will to fight against a tidal wave of grief threatening to pull me under. In time, I found ways to live within this new normal life without my child, but the pain never fully leaves me. There are days when it cracks me wide open, when my heart feels like it might burst from the weight of it all. The tears come endlessly, unbidden. There are days I hide from the world, unwilling to face its questions or explain yet again what happened to my son. It feels like everyone is eager for the gruesome details of a child's death, as if it's something so rare it fascinates them. But to us, the parents of the child who died, it's a painful thing to voice, a grief too deep for words alone. Grief has successfully derailed my life more times than I can count, year after year, a constant shadow I've had to learn to live with. I understand now that everything living must die, including myself one day. And with every loss, someone is left behind to carry the burden of that absence. But there is no more profound grief for me than losing my child. I've lost my mother, my dad, I've lost my best friend, I've lost so many people along the way. But the hardest one for me personally has been the loss of Matthew. And it's just unnatural for a parent to have to bury a child. No parent should have to do it, but yet here I am, surviving somehow. I'm still here. In the stillness when I'm alone, I pause and listen deeply. In those moments, I hear the echoes of his life. I hear his voice so clearly, especially the way he called me little mommy, a sound that wrapped me in love. I hear his infectious laughter, brimming with passion and joy, a sound so full of life it could light up a room. I see his smile, that mischievous curve at the corner of his lips, as if he were always up to something, and Matthew usually was. I remember his kindness, how he never failed to hold open a door for a woman. I remember his love for the past, his delight in collecting treasures from history. I recall his excitement for new experiences, how his eyes sparkled when he immersed himself in other cultures. I remember his love of fishing, the thrill when he felt when he reeled in that perfect catch. I think of his devotion to his friends, his pets, and his family, especially the adoration he had for his little sister, Megan, and his niece and nephew, Jaden and Everly Rose. I remember the time he saved a life while serving in the Army, his courage and selflessness shining through. He lived with a zest for adventure, seizing each day as if it were his last. Flying helicopters, jumping out of planes, kayaking, mountain biking. He was always the ultimate sportsman, pushing boundaries and savoring life's thrills. I remember the day I first set eyes on him, my only son, my firstborn, and I remember the exact moment as they closed his coffin, and with it, a piece of my heart followed, shutting out everything but the pain that I will have to endure for my lifetime. But most of all, I remember him, my son, my Matthew. I remember that he lived. His life echoes into the wind, weaving through my life and resonating into the forever. For Matthew Scott Riley, from your mommy, I love you, sweetie. Always and forever, your little mommy,